Hello all. This video was intended as a straightforward blast through making this footstool. I changed the detail midway through, so as it turns out, this was quite an instructive build for something that was initially a simple addition to a more complicated chair. Changing one component on the stool has offered up what I think a slight aesthetic enhancement to carry through to my chairs, not to mention it being a more structural element, adding strength and stiffness. Never a bad thing. This is the lounge chair the footstool is designed to partner, called the LC1. The chair's been quite well received thankfully, not just for its looks, which my poor photography does little justice, but also for its comfort. This one's quite low, generous in width, and with enough back height to rest your head. Really comfy. Just needed a footstool to help you nod off when sat in it. The footstool I'll be making is essentially the same as for my RC1 reclining chair, just smaller. Main reason for this is I thought the chair design seemed to have a pretty convenient space around the back to tuck the stool out of the way and more discreet. Getting into it then, this footstool, like the chair it partners, are made from poplar. None of my favourite white beech around at the time unfortunately, and the only other light wood at the timber merchant, maple, wasn't thick enough to finish at my required 48mm. Poplar boards it was then. Poplar's an underrated wood. If clean lines or straight grain are what you want, it's worth considering. Very easily worked and low cost. Not a great density, so probably not up to fine detail or spindly work, but for my oversized looping frames, not bad at all. Poplar is so often considered the wood you paint, but I'm attempting to enjoy its grain by matching it up. What I've laid out here is what you might call the top rail or apron rail, laid out in the centre of a piece, with enough either side to grain match its adjoining legs. The joints will be mitered and loose tenoned. The important marks at this stage are the outside edge and the crossover that gives me the mitre position. Having cut the miters on the top rail piece, I cut corresponding miters on the pieces that will be the legs. No layout marks yet on the legs. Alignment is first. I chose to grain match these pieces, the sides, as these are what most people in the room will most likely be looking at, more so than the front or back. Happy with the position, I use the template to follow on from the top rail to the legs. Then I can start to get rid of some of the surplus from the legs and rail. I make a reference mark across the mitered face on both legs and the rail to set my machine to make the mortises. A single 12x36 mortise for a loose tenon, well for these pieces at least. I have to do something a little different for the feet later, as you'll see. Any of you that watched my reclining chair build might remember me doing a substantial double mortise and tenon 12x36 for the joints. I'm trying the single mortise in this orientation as it gives me quite a bit more flexibility with more acute joint angles and increased tenon depth. In test it's proven plenty strong enough. The chair actually has double mortise and tenon on every joint except at the rear foot. These have the single floating tenon, albeit with a 100mm screw through the centre. The screw there to pull the joints together, as being the final joint on the assembly, clamping these curves and angles, which are offset at that, was nigh on impossible. This method worked great though. Back to the stool then. This isn't always necessary, but I like to give one of the mitered faces a few taps with the round end of the hammer around the mortise, avoiding the outside edges. This creates a very slight hollow and in theory just gives an extra hair of freedom to get a tight glue joint minimal line. Just sort of a habit for me now really. So here's where it gets a bit funky and I decided I wanted to change the appearance and function of one of the components. As such, it became obvious I was going to need a Footstool domino type loose mortise to enable the fine assembly to go together. I don't have a domino, but I do have Peter Millard's 10-minute workshop loose tenon jig, which will do what I need. But with my setup, only works with my big router. Not ideal, but I'm getting a loose mortise plate for my copy router to make this easier and for my more appropriate 12x36 tenons. For some reason I don't have a good clear frontal shot of the chair, but hopefully you can see here the end stop for the upholstery is a straight butt joint where it meets the main frame. I quite like it. It looks clean, but I think it being sculpted, blending into the frame will look better. The original is housed 6mm deep at each end, but I also want the new version to be more structural with a 25mm long tenon each end. A quick dry fit then to double check the lengths. The Bosch GLM50C laser measure makes easy work of internal measurements. These upholstery end stops have, until now, been quite slight pieces. It feels kind of odd preparing pieces this size for the job. They'll be whittled down a fair bit by the time they're done mine. Tenons first before anything fancy, marked, then scored to minimise breakout. I'll be honest with you, I was quite frustrated here. I usually like to cut my shoulders with a tenon saw or Japanese dozuki. The blades on both mine have split. I have a feeling my saw roll has been stood on at some point. Not happy. As a result, the trusty miter saw is on tenon duty. I don't really like doing it like this. It's slow compared to the hand saws and is rough as rats, so we'll need some clean up to get it just so. Here we are then, final sizing the tenons. I'm not after a glassy smooth tenon here, just the right size. In fact, unless it's a through tenon where appearance is a consideration, having slightly roughed tenon faces can give better glue hold. Shoulders are a different matter of course, these need to be primo. Despite using the stops on the miter saw, it has left just a slight few wisps where the piece was rolled around and the shoulders cut. A few minutes well spent making these good. The receiving mortise, marked, routed, squared, Bosch. Linking up with the mortise is the housing for the upholstery, just 6mm deep. Rather than make a specific template for this, I'm just reusing ones from the main chair for now. The angle's a bit more acute than the 90° needed, but this stall's just a test bed, not a piece I'd sell, so it being not quite the right radius matters not. It's something chair aficionados can pontificate on when I'm long gone and finally recognised for my work. Another dry fit. You can see I've roughly marked what's to be removed, giving me a 20mm internal radius matching that of the foot below. In fact, all my internal radii are 20mm. While I'm at this point, I would say that this isn't the way you'd normally go about creating a blend like this. I'm only doing it this way as it was an afterthought. Normally, and how this will be done in the future, you'd have stock on the receiving or female piece, the leg in this instance, a kind of outcropping. Then you butt a straight piece into it. This will give you a fine, straight glue line at the join. As I've sort of been forced to do here by my own lack of foresight, I'll be blending into a face. This will of course give me the look I'm after, so I can assess whether I prefer the straight butt or the curved blend, but the glue line may wander as I remove material to make it look and feel just so. So here's the original piece that was originally meant to be fit, by the way. The same as on the chair, straight butt into the leg face. Once whittled away, my new one will be dimensionally the same, except at the ends. Moving on, rebate cut for the clamping piece for the upholstery ends. Then some of the heft taken away at the bandsaw. A quick look here as I get the clamping order on my head. You can hopefully see why I need the long mortise for the dominoes to allow me to jiggle all this together. The glue up was finicky with little adjustments here and there to get all the joint faces just so. A real one and done, so there's no way I was having a camera over my shoulder getting in the way. Still, all is well. Onto a bit of template routage for the lovely curves. Banggood sent me a few compression bits months ago. I did mean to review them, but I was having a bit of a YouTube hiatus at the time. The bits have had some serious use though, and are pretty impressive. This one in particular can take quite a serious bite into material before there's any chatter. Lovely clean edges top and bottom too. I'll try and review them properly soon, but I'll put links below if you want to have a look. Change of router and bit. The little Mafel is sporting a bearing top cove cutter. This is to give me the blend into the leg face. Then back onto the big Bosch with the compression bit, removing the rest of the waste on the upholstery stop. The result is something like that. Little Mafel on rounding duty now. 6mm I do on my frames. It's not to round so much as to fully soften the square profile. Something like this, the machines can only take you so far. So here assembled is the whittling crew. Small round file, chisel, rasp, spoke shave and sandpaper. 80 and 180 grit in this instance, as my 120 arrived a day late. This is a process that's done when you feel it's done. Just keep at it until the transitions are buttery smooth and indistinguishable to the touch. Takes as long as it takes. This would actually be a lot less work when removing stock from the leg, as I mentioned earlier, as opposed to removing the stock butting into the leg as I'm doing here. Still a process that takes time, just that you can help yourself with good planning. I'm not going to cover the finishing process, as it'd be good to do a video on just that in the not too distant. Safe to say that after blending, the whole thing got sanded up to 320, then the process of finish application began. Instead, to round up the build, I'll show you me making the aluminium clamp pieces for the upholstery. On finished designs and products, these are CNC'd. But on the pieces I'm still tweaking, I make them right here. 6mm alley plate with a little paper tracing of the housing I've machined in the frame. The plate comes with a white plastic protector on one side, good for marking and keeps the polished face looking nice as you work. A 6mm 8 TPI blade in the bandsaw makes for easy work on the alley plate. Marks for screw holes get punched, drilled, then countersunk, and finally a quick deburr on the back side. Not quite the job the CNCs will do, but perfectly functional. There they are seated, ready to clamp the wings on the upholstery. All finished. I'm still a little torn on whether I prefer the upholstery stop a straight butt, as was originally, or with the more curvy blended look. Aesthetically, I really like both, but the new blended version is very much more tactile, and so I think wins out. It's more work, even when I do them properly and not how I did here, but they feel so good that ultimately I think it's worth it. Let me know what you think below, and as always, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.